Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm an investor with GSV Ventures, and I also lead the GSV Cup with Fran. We're really excited to have you all here today, tuning in to our next webinar session for the GSV Cup Startup Academy series. If you haven't tuned in yet, we've been doing a series of virtual webinars led by experts from leading EdTech companies on various topics for early stage founders, anything from product to people to growth. So we're really excited for today's session. A few quick things to note. The summit is 2 months away, which is insane. We will be announcing the top 20 for the GSV Cup probably early March, but it'll be coming out really soon. So definitely stay tuned for that. And then just logistically, we will have 30 minutes for this session, and then we'll open up for live Q&A from all of you. So please submit your questions at any point during the session, and you can submit them through the Q&A function at the bottom. So yeah, be sure to do that, and we'll get to all your questions at the end. Okay, so without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our two guest speakers who will be talking about finding product market fit within digital learning. So first, I have Ben Christensen, who is co-founder of Handshake. And then we also have Justin Barad, who is founder and CEO of Osso VR. So Ben, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Really excited to be here. Really excited to be chatting with everyone. So my name's Ben. I'm the co-founder of Handshake. We are a platform really focusing on how do we help people find and get access to opportunities. So really helping people as they come into that first job after college, internships along the way, really do that in a way that helps level the playing field. There's just a lot that can stand in the way of that. Access, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, being a first generation student, et cetera. I personally have been through a lot of areas of the business over time, from managing our product team for a few years, growing our go-to-market team for about 3 years, people and talent for about 3 years as well, and now back into the product side again. But I'll wrap it up there, and very excited to be chatting more with y'all today.
Awesome. Justin?
Hey, everybody. I'm Justin Barad. I actually started out my career wanting to be a video game developer. I got interested in healthcare because a family member had some serious medical issues and just wondered if there was a way to use software and technology, not necessarily for entertainment, but to help people. So ended up pursuing biomedical engineering. And then I really didn't know how to get started with invention. I really wanted to create new technology. And mentor told me, if you want to invent something, you really need to understand the problem you're trying to solve first. And he thought a great way to do that was to be a doctor. So I took his advice quite literally. And I went to med school at UCLA and did my training to become an orthopedic surgeon there as well. And was able to combine my two life passions, video games and healthcare, and start Osso VR in 2016. And Osso is a surgical training platform that leverages virtual reality. And we can be used for any procedure. So anything from putting in an IV to doing complex robotic surgery, running on off-the-shelf VR headsets. And we allow people to train on any procedure using their hands in a haptic enhanced realistic way. They also can train as a team or get coached remotely with collaborative training from anywhere in the world. Sometimes I use it for my parked car, which looks really funny. And you also get objective assessment, which is sorely needed in healthcare. I think people will be shocked to learn that the only time I personally have been objectively assessed, I was asked to play the board game Operation as a practicing surgeon. So the bar is low, but we've come a long way, and it's really exciting to be here.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. All right. So excited to dive into this topic around product market fit. And what's really special is we have two founders who successfully found product market fit within this space. And reminder that the audience is early stage founders. So I'm going to ask you both to try to draw on some of the early days in terms of when you were creating your product, thinking about those metrics, your target audience, all of that kind of stuff. Because I think that'll be the biggest value add for this audience. So I guess to kick it off for both of you, and Ben, we can start with you, but when you thought about the early stages of Handshake and really trying to define your target audience and do some of that initial early customer testing, how did you think about that? How broad did you go? How narrow? How should early stage founders think about that?
Yeah, it was a bit of an interesting thing for us because we really are a three-sided marketplace. And so it started for us as college students ourselves, really running into this problem and seeing this problem. And so we knew that that was the area we wanted to focus on, was that early part of the career. We also knew that that early part of the career makes so much of an impact on the rest of your career over time. If you end up underemployed out of college, typically about 50% of those people are still underemployed 10 years later. So we knew that was our core audience. We also knew that working with schools was a key way to be able to reach both those students and employers. And so we had a kind of pretty defined overall population we were focused on. The question for us was more about where do we focus within those? And so for us, it was really about identifying like what are the groups of influencers and segments and really testing product market fit within that. So, hey, we know we can help schools that are small regional schools, but how do we also make this work for an elite liberal arts institution? How do we make this work for the small rural community college, right? How do we make this work for an engineering school? And so we needed to pick these pockets and really then drill in on what product market fit was for each of those. So a little bit of kind of an interesting setup for us because we had such a defined audience right from the get-go, but really drilling in on the details was the focus for us.
That's interesting that you really thought about product market fit within each of those different types of schools. That's really interesting. And then Justin, I guess, did you always know kind of, obviously you're working with surgeons and people within that field, was that kind of very clear then your target audience, or was it ever broader than that?
No, I mean, it's training in procedural care delivery is actually pretty complicated. There are a lot of stakeholders, and the way that it works and who pays for what is way more complicated than you'd expect. So really, I mean, the initial insight was my own experience. I'm training at some of the top hospitals in the world, and we'd be in the middle of a surgery and someone would be like, hey, you like run to the computer and Google real quick what to do here? We haven't done this before or done it in a while. And it's like, they didn't exactly say the word Google, but that's basically what they wanted me to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wow. So, that's what really sort of clued me that something serious was going on. And, anything from routine procedures to one time we had to operate on a gorilla, which is a story for another time. So, which we're clearly unprepared for. So the need was very clear to me, but how to go about doing it was not clear, I think, to anyone really. And the idea of not practicing surgery on people is not new, right? That's not rocket science, but the way it's been done in the past is really an emphasis on this large custom technology that's built around a single procedure when we need to know how to do like hundreds, if not thousands, on demand. And also they were selling it to the hospital. So they'd sell this like one piece of equipment to a hospital, which is like these giant healthcare systems. There's no trackable ROI there. It's a nice to have. They're like, oh, we should do this, but they're not really making more money or saving money or seeing vastly different patient outcomes. And to give you an example of traditional simulation, how often it's used, it's maybe once a year. So like how much value is really being delivered there. Mm-hmm. Now, around the same time, I personally was being flown around the world by the medical device industry to learn how to use their new products. Because if you don't have a driver's license, you're not going to buy a car, right? So if we don't know how to use the latest in robotics or minimally invasive surgery, we're not going to use it on our patients. And these companies aren't going to be able to sell their products. So they actually pay for our training a significant amount, but it's not enough. So I'll fly out to a course, maybe get 1 to 2 tries on this new device, and then I'm using it maybe 3 to 4 months later. And just imagine you're operating on someone with a device with a learning curve of 100 cases that you used once 3 to 4 months ago. That's not going to go very well. And so the adoption of these emerging medical technologies was shockingly low. And so I really had sort of 2 key hypotheses at the beginning of the company. One is that we need to create a universal simulation platform that can simulate any procedure and that I can bring with me. That's portable. I can use it anytime. So I could use it every day and not just once a year. Mm-hmm. And so with the emergence of sort of off-the-shelf VR headsets, which at the time people thought this was just for games. So everyone thought this was a terrible idea. But I saw that, just having something with you was so powerful that you can train on any procedure. It's like crazy. And then the other hypothesis was that let's not focus on hospitals, or surgeons, which makes a lot of sense, but actually let's focus on the medical device industry to better train surgeons in these newer technologies to drive adoption and decrease the cost of training in the overall process. And that actually ended up working in like almost immediately right out the gate. And the model has evolved slightly, but that's still how the business works today. So I think it's not, I don't think I'm like, orthopedic surgeons are like notoriously, like they say, strong as an ox and twice as smart. So I don't think I'm the smartest person in the room, but I think living the problem really helped me to sort of intuit sort of the pathway towards scaling a successful product.
Yeah. And I mean, the way you worked with some of those medical device companies, obviously the incentives were really aligned. So for them to want to push your product out, that makes a lot of sense versus like the hospitals where it's like a nice to have, exactly what you're saying. That's really interesting. So I guess talking about this blank, I feel like people throw around the phrase product market fit, right? And like, what does that actually really mean? When do you know you found it? What are you even chasing after? I think, and obviously it can mean a lot of different things depending on your company, but I guess for both of you, just talking about some concrete metrics, right? Like, did you define it based on usage? Were you targeting a certain retention? Like, how did you think about defining some of those metrics early on around, okay, this is how we know we're on the right track?
I can start on that. It was honestly not a super measured specific sort of thing. It was more on like, hey, what's the sentiment we're hearing? What are we seeing here? And for us, again, we were really trying to look at product market fit from three angles, right? So we want to bring on these schools as paying partners, but they're also a distribution channel to the students and employers. They're using an existing platform. We're replacing that platform for them, but we're really coming from a different angle of what these platforms were before. The previous platforms were very kind of just focused on enterprise tooling. Think like a Salesforce to a sales team was what these tools were to a career center. And we were really trying to focus more on, hey, like, let's really make this something that's great for students. And so we were just coming out of college as we did it. So product market fit at first for us as students was, would this have worked for us? That quickly changed into now let's talk to more people coming from more backgrounds and really so doing a lot of just kind of talking to students at all these different campuses, seeing how they felt about things. With our schools, it was really, from a metric perspective, are we seeing an uplift in student engagement and are we seeing an uplift in employer engagement? Because those were the differentiators between these homegrown or one-off systems that schools were using before. And then mix that all with just what's the market sentiment, right? Are schools wanting to buy? If they're not, what are the list of the blockers? What things actually make sense according to our philosophy or not? And so we didn't necessarily have like a graph of like, have we met product market fit? What's our percentage towards it? Whatever else. But those were all the inputs to kind of how we would kind of adjust by feel for a while, which was then very different from down the line, our kind of much more structured OKRs and KPIs that we had.
Yeah. So a lot of qualitative data, is that kind of?
Yeah, it was very much qualitative outside of that uplift in student engagement and employer engagement. And so we would measure those and we'd share those with prospects. And if we were seeing that it was not working well at a certain school, we'd really need to dive in there. But that was almost more of a like, customer like success sort of metric, more so than like product market fit, because usually it's more about the interventions, helping enable schools and different things. But that was probably the most measurable and the rest was really all qualitative.
That's really interesting. And then, sorry, just on this point, I guess, so how did you think about even some of those like the right questions to ask, right? If I'm trying to get market sentiment and I'm trying to understand, is it as simple as, do you like this product? Or are you interested in using this? Or kind of what are maybe some of those specific questions you can ask?
I think the biggest thing that we did that was really helpful for us to really get a sense of that was early on, I kind of talked about finding these pockets of schools. And so we identified what these different pockets were. And then we also identified who are the people leading these career centers at these schools that are really influencers and innovators in the space. And we focused almost all of our time on them. And so that meant actually that we maybe weren't doing as much towards the immediate product market fit of some of the more laggard schools. But we knew that this would kind of bring them towards that over time and also be part of the key differentiation. So identified these folks, and I can talk about stories about how we actually got in the door with them later. But what we did was we ended up setting up events with these key innovators where we weren't actually talking about our product, but more using it as a thing to bring together influencers in space and say, hey, where is the future going? What are the things you're excited about? What things do you see going away? What are the challenges that you're facing today? And they would talk about that with us in the room and us associated with it. And that both helped us be kind of associated with the future and the direction of things, as well as for us to really learn about what are the most ideas. And so we could use that to assess like, hey, is our product delivering value on these key things that are really on the minds of all these schools? And if not, how do we adjust towards that? Mix that with then also just because there was a bit of a rip and replace piece. Some of it was just checkbox checking, right? It needs to do A, B, C, and D, no matter what. It's like, okay, we just need to like check mark our way through those. And then we effectively had a list outside of that of like, philosophically aligned things or not. And we would do a lot of just questions of like, hey, what else do you need? What isn't this doing? A lot of kind of through sales conversations, that sort of thing.
No, I love how you guys, I think one of my favorite things I've heard is Garrett talking one time about how you guys would sleep in the parking lots of McDonald's in your van because it had the best Wi-Fi and just really going school to school and having these conversations. I mean, that's really so impressive. So yeah, Justin, obviously, totally different product. Curious how you kind of thought about it and those metrics at the early stage.
Well, I just would second, you're probably not doing early stage founding right if you haven't slept in the car for a fair bit of time. So I can relate to that story. I think for us, and we're a B2B business. And in the early days, like it just evolved of like how we thought about, are we being successful? Is this working? I think, one first thing is just like, can we get a signed contract? Can we get someone to pay for this? I think that was like really the first step. And then we started looking more at just usage. Like, can we get people to use this, and can we get that number to grow over time? And even just measuring that in the first place was like a whole technology and feature we had to develop, because that was kind of challenging at the time. And then we started looking like, oh, well, like, okay, like how long are people using the product or engaging for? And then what features are they using? That helped us kind of indicate like, are these features working? And that was really interesting. And now we're starting to be like, okay, like how many different people are using it, and starting to think about, are they coming back for more? Starting to think about that. But I will say, as we've gone down this road of, whatever product market fit means, I think one of the things, there are a couple of things I think that I noticed that I'm like, I really feel like we do have this. One is that we could never seem to keep up with demand. Like we're always behind, and like we don't have enough capacity to do all the things we want to do, or all of our product that our customers want. So that seems like a good problem to have, right? Our VP of product is always like, I'd much rather be in that situation than just like have overcapacity, not enough demand. So I think that's been one thing that we've been looking at there. And especially as we've kind of got into sort of this global downturn, I think what's been really interesting is to look at, as customers are looking at, well, are we going to cut headcount, or are we going to cut the utilization of VR training? And they're cutting headcount, and I'm like, obviously, I don't want anyone to get laid off for us, but I'm like, that's really interesting to me that people are choosing to stick with our product, which is software, versus, actual heads, because it's delivering that much value. I think that's a very strong indication. And in addition, we are seeing the usage go up and to the right in this setting as well. So on kind of like listening to customer feedback to guide us and things like that, I would say that obviously we have to build what our customers want and features that they want, but I'm not sure, this is my first startup, so I don't know if VR is more challenging than other spaces, but I think that the problem with VR is that it's capable of seemingly anything. Mm-hmm. And that makes for something very challenging, because it makes the mind run wild, and everyone has a lot of ideas, which is like, well, to scale a platform, you really got to kind of keep everyone on the same path. And so, especially in the early days, when not only is VR capable of anything, but there was like, felt very similar to a little bit of how generative AI is now, like we're talking about, there's just so much out there. There was like 360 video, AR, gloves, various forms of haptics. There was mobile AR, there was wireless, tethered. It was insane. And so just like, even just being like, okay, well, like, what is VR? Like, what is it, what you do, is a major challenge for us. And so we had to say no to a lot of things that our customers felt like they really wanted. And there were a couple of deals that fell through, because we're like, that's not, we are building a platform, and we're not like a custom project house. It all kind of needs to be sort of the same. And that was very difficult, because we're like, are we doing the right thing here? And customers really want this, but we're like, they say we're being stubborn. But I do think that is how we've been able to scale, by like a little bit of that product discipline. And I think coming in with a point of view. I would be like really scared to be in a business that you didn't have like a very firm understanding of kind of like what the problem was. Because you get like 3 customers who are like some of the most famous experts in this area in the world, and they're telling you 3 mutually exclusive things. Like, how are you supposed to decide without having your own point of view? And so I think that has really helped us just sort of like carve a path through what is much easier now, but like in the early days was like unbelievably challenging.
I'll just to add on to it a little bit, I would say I completely agree with those points. And I think what you say no to is so critical and so important. So just really want to underscore that note, because there's so many things. We had a customer early on that was going to offer us something like 5 to 10x what our highest contract value was, but they wanted a ton of just custom work, which would have been not things that are aligned to that philosophy. And so towards Justin's points, like, you do need to have this point of view. Like, we effectively established like a list of like key principles. Like, these are things that we care about incredibly, and like we'll never compromise on. These are things we will absolutely never do. And then we knew there was a kind of big middle in there that we just needed to learn from everyone. And so, but as we were making decisions and deciding what was a fit, it needed to really fit into those key principles. And I think part of the benefit of getting conversations with a wide variety of folks is when you do get those three separate opinions, right? It gives you that chance to make your own choice around it. Instead of, if you're just talking to one of them, you might start to run down that one path, and then you can just get kind of jerked back and forth as you get these other opinions. So what you said, completely agree that what you say no to and how you do that is so critical.
No, I love that because I would imagine it's really easy to get pulled in a lot of different directions because I'm sure, again, you're hearing from so many different customers, I want this, and really setting up those lists, especially lists of what you won't do, I think is a really interesting point. Was there ever any kind of metric, I guess, around, okay, if I heard this from 10 customers, 12, 15 customers, that they really wanted this, then you kind of, all right, maybe we'll move forward with building this. Was it ever that concrete, or was it more just kind of, you feel it out?
So I think that's where that spectrum of like will never do to like always care about kind of things really mattered. So like one practical example was we said we would never like white label Handshake. So Handshake was called Handshake at every single college campus. We thought that was really important for the future because students talk to each other across campuses. We wanted that common language because we thought that really helped with student engagement and some of these kind of cross campus connections. And we heard from probably every single one of our schools about wanting to white label the product, and that still was not going to shift that. And so if something was in our like we will never do sort of column, we weren't going to do it. We lost deals over that, right? They eventually did come back later once they saw kind of that student engagement and employer engagement differentiators outweighed kind of this like customization element. But we knew that was a never going to do, versus there were other things like, hey, we didn't want to build this complex workflow around this particular feature thing because it didn't feel that impactful for students, because students first is one of our values. But because we heard it from so many important schools, it became this factor of, well, we're not going to be able to bring these students on to be able to help them anyway if we don't build this complex feature. And so let's build this complex feature.
Yeah, no, that makes, I think I was like within that space, right? So you have the bucket of things you won't do, but within that space of, okay, we're hearing a bunch of feedback, we could do this. How do you then prioritize, even just in general, like if you think about your product roadmap, how do you set up those priorities? Because I'm sure there's a bunch of, like you said, Justin, there's a million different ways things you can do with VR in different directions. How do you really set up that prioritization of your product roadmap?
Yeah, the quick thing I'll add, sorry, Justin, and then I realize I'm jumping over that, but I think for us is effectively kind of just that if Rice score, people have heard of that, right? Looking at like how many schools, what's the impact, what's the complexity, how hard is it going to be, and things kind of went through that. And there wasn't that in that middle space, there wasn't necessarily like hard nose to stuff. It was like now versus maybe later, and kind of things along that spectrum. But that was our approach. Sorry, Justin, jumped over you there.
No, I mean it's hard, and it leads to a lot of stress with customers and internally. I think, we often go back to, we're a mission driven company. So we're like, is this like kind of in line with our mission is one thing that helps centers us. And then also just, what is Osso VR? It's a VR immersive surgical training platform for any procedure, but like things that get outside of that, like a tour of a hospital or, well, can we distribute this and things that are like good ideas, but like, I'm like, well, that's not what we do. Like, can we distribute this on a mobile app and so that everyone can have access to that? And that's more democratized. I'm like, well, then it's like that exists. And a lot of people do that. We're not going to be the best at that. We're the best at VR training, right? And then things that get a little more out there where it's like, well, what about haptic gloves and using your hands and fingers, which obviously this all makes sense. And then we get a lot of requests that kind of, we start, it's funny how all of our brains work the same, but I can't tell you the number of times people have requested us to allow you to train on a spaceship, which we may still do one day, especially if we end up training astronauts, which we've looked into. But that is like a weird, very common request. And then a lot of people ask us for like intraoperative things like, well, can you do what you do in surgery, or can you do navigation, which is like really cool. But once again, it's like, well, that's not like what our specialty is. And there are other companies that do those sorts of things. So I'd say that one of the approaches I'm taking, because up until this point, I think we've gotten really good at, we know exactly what everybody's going to say because our brains all work very similarly, and they're going to talk about haptic feedback and augmented reality and gloves. And so, we have a lot of our own research and existing research we point to. And usually when we go through these talk tracks, our customers are like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. That makes a lot of sense. This makes so much sense now. I didn't realize that. Thank you. But, I'm getting tired of saying those talk tracks. And two, I don't like the idea of like telling people what to do, be like, oh, I know better than you. Because once again, I'm not the smartest person in the world. And I'm like, why don't we just let them come to our own conclusions? And why don't we build these different things in sort of like little bits. So we don't put a lot of work into it, but just show them why the path that we're on makes the most sense. So we've kind of started building out all of the things that people typically ask for so they can see why what we're doing actually makes a lot of sense. And that's been really fun and interesting so far to kind of experiment with this stuff and just sort of I have one of my medical heroes, this guy, Andreas Vesalius, who overturned 1,000 years of stale medical knowledge. And one of the ways he did that is instead of dissecting 4 people on cadavers and telling them what he was seeing, he's like, you do the dissection and you tell me what you see. And so we're trying to do a little bit more of like show, don't tell kind of approach, which has made my life a bit easier.
That's awesome. That's really smart. I'm obviously you both are, leaders of very successful companies, but obviously I'm sure there were bumps in the road. Was there ever a time where, maybe the product was headed towards a certain direction, you realized you had to pivot, whether it was like certain features you were building out or whatever it was? Totally fine if it's all been perfect and and it's okay. But yeah, if there was a time where you had to pivot, what was that time and kind of how did you make that decision?
You want to go first on that, Justin?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, it's remarkably similar to how it was in the very beginning, which, I think is like surprising. I would say probably one of the things that we pivoted the most on or iterated, I would say, is really the business model. I would say that we're still trying to figure out what the best model is. And that in the early days was very challenging. And I think that almost like broke everything because we had a certain model that I think was closer to the right model, but maybe not priced correctly. And then we got some feedback. One customer was like, we're not going to do this deal until you change this model. And they really forced us into it. But we also kind of liked the idea of more of an at-risk kind of user-based model. And so we're like, oh, well, like we kind of wanted to do this. So we ended up doing that. And that was a disaster. And, we really just we're like, well, we got to stick with one model. So we stuck with it, even though we just started to see the wheels come off. And I mean, the second we got away from that, things started kind of picking back up. But that was a point where we were definitely like, is this going to work? Because things were, once we met the criteria for that risk portion and it was time to be like, hey, we actually did our part. So like now, it's like, we have to be compensated, like just things would explode very dramatically. And like that started happening all at once. So that was like a little scary, but, we learned from that and we iterated the model. But I do think that your business model should get as much attention. That's part of the product. So it should get as much attention as like kind of the technology and the design. And I think it's just so often overlooked. And it's not getting like that constant iteration and improvement like every other part of the product is, which I think it's so easy to just not pay attention to that. But there's so much to gain by just optimizing the model, and it can be fun, innovative.
Yeah, I think it's also like, let me figure out the product first and then I'll figure out the go-to-market business model after. And it's like you said, it goes very hand in hand. Ben, do you have any pivots?
We didn't have any major pivots. We have had like kind of tweaks and adjustments over time. And so having 3 sides to the market, we've had like different levels of investment over time, right? So the early years were almost 100% on what do schools need. We got towards the point where we were closer to meeting the majority of the critical needs there. And then it was, okay, we really need to spend a bunch of time on students now. And then we need to start to build out our freemium model for employers because there's a base free model for all employers. But if you want to do more advanced sourcing, recruiting, we've got premium features on top of that. And so we had basically these kind of shifts between, okay, when are we putting time into each of these, but never any kind of major pivots per se, more just kind of a shifting of priorities, shifting of resourcing across those different areas and how that then changes how you might manage things with your customers.
That's interesting. Okay, well, we are actually at the time of our, scheduled program, and then we're going to hop into Q&A. People have been submitting a bunch that I see here. So I'm going to run through some of these questions. And then just as a heads up, I will ask you both to give some, parting words of wisdom, advice to some of these early stage founders who are pre-product market fit. So this is my heads up. So you have time to prepare it in your head. But yeah, just rolling through some of these questions. I think obviously, you both are venture-backed companies, so have pitched to investors before. How did you think about when you're pitching your product to investors and trying to think about showing them that you have product traction, product market fit? I guess, how did you talk about that to investors?
I think it really depended on the investor for us, since we're kind of in a specialized space. The way we would talk about the product was a bit different for people who were a little more familiar with healthcare, especially the medical device industry, than those who are maybe more generalized software investors. We would show them the usage and the engagement. I think at the end of the day, at least to me, it seemed like they were just much more interested in the commercial traction, and wanting to see that, and then hearing from customers, which is something we didn't want. Like, our customers love us, and we're like excited for them to talk to investors, but we also didn't want to overwhelm them, which definitely happened at one point, but it just couldn't help it. But so it's like, you gotta, at least for me, it was like to get the VC committed to a certain point where you knew at least you were going to get a partner meeting or some sort of like consideration, and then we would allow them to talk to our customers. But we knew that was our strongest weapon, but at the same time, we wanted to use it conservatively.
Very similar to answer to what Justin mentioned from our side. So once we usually wouldn't do like customer intros right away, it'd be a little bit further along after a meeting or two. And before that, it was really about just, we could show different customer satisfaction scores. We would show our growth rates, right? And so our biggest indicator of, hey, we found product market fit was, hey, look, here's the rate of new schools that we've brought on and the partnerships there. Here's the feedback that students are sharing. And so we'd bring a lot of that together as we talked to investors. And usually really framed around with each kind of fundraising round, it was always framed in the, okay, and here's the next major milestone for us and what we're raising this money to do, and showing basically, and hey, last time we raised money, this is what we said we were aiming to do, and hey, we've done that thing, and here's the proof that we've done that thing. And so it was kind of using those to show that product market fit. And the very first rounds of funding was like our seed round and our A was very much just, here are quotes from customers, here is the acceleration of adoption in the market, here's where we're getting in terms of events and other things we're doing, and sentiment we've heard around that as well, and bringing it all together. But getting a few customers on the phone definitely made a huge difference as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then Justin, you use this, term earlier, but thinking about really nice to have versus need to have, and especially, I mean, both your products, if you think about even through a downturn or any type of recession, like even if you're hearing great qualitative feedback in the beginning, how do you know you're really building a product that is need to have and will be resilient in what might be a downturn?
I mean, I think just seeing it is one thing. I think that seeing the usage data grow despite horrific market conditions, to me was like, okay, that clearly this is something that they can no longer do without, which was good to see. But for us, I don't think you can ever stop really positioning the product as a need to have, because things change so quickly and the world changes. And what I've seen at least in our space, where you have these two categories, I think of like COVID related technologies. There's like the COVID dependent, which are technologies that grew super fast because of COVID. And then in this sort of post-COVID era, or whatever you want to call it, it's no longer needed, and it just like the rug gets pulled out. And then you get the sort of COVID accelerator, where it was a boost, but it was still useful in normal times too. And I think that's what we were seeing with kind of our data, which I was like kind of anxious to see if it held up. But I think that as new technologies gets introduced, as you like, inevitably whatever you're doing at one point was like the sexy technology, it will at an accelerating pace will no longer be, right. Where we've been in and out. VR has been like popping in and out for whatever reason, but now it's generative AI. Everyone's going to be focused on that. So you have to make sure that the reason why that people are using your technology is not because it's a new technology, is because it solves a problem, and just aggressively working with your customers to position it that way, and make sure that on the front end of any engagement or expansion or just the new fiscal year, what have you, is like, you're like, what are we doing with this tech together? And how is it going to drive value for your business and for your patients, for your customers? And then let's make sure we're measuring that and improving those in case studies, and then ideally be able to package those and reuse those externally and kind of create that flywheel. But that's something that like we spend, I would say like 70% of our commercial efforts, like planning up front with business value analysis, and then running the case studies and facilitating those, and then like running through marketing and product marketing and writing up the case studies for our customers to use, to sort of justify the investment. But it's like that is just a constant, like I would say, constant vigilance. Like you can become irrelevant overnight if you're not just careful about positioning the product properly, despite it working perfectly. So like I just don't think you can put enough effort or attention into that exact question.
There's the commonly used kind of framing of, is your product kind of a painkiller or a vitamin? Painkiller being the one where I got a massive headache. I need this to make this problem go away for me right now, versus vitamins, like this is going to help me down the line. And you can certainly and should have vitamin-like elements to your product. But if you don't have a painkiller element, it's just going to be so much harder to really bring in customers. It's going to be way harder to stay embedded. And with all that too, I think we are constantly looking at are we delivering enough value and the right kind of value to people that it would be incredibly painful to stop using us as well, right? So like if you dropped Handshake tomorrow, what is that going to mean for your student engagement on an employer side, right? What's that going to mean for your efforts and outreach to be able to reach different schools? And if we look at it and we're like, actually, no, this customer could drop us tomorrow and it would not actually be a painful decision for them, that means that we're off track somewhere. And so I think being really thoughtful about what makes your product sticky for people, how you continue to make sure that you are solving immediate pains and you are that painkiller for people and not just this proactive vitamin, I think is really critical towards ability to stay really relevant for your customers.
Yeah. And I think, so a lot of questions that are coming in around, so I think a big indication of being a painkiller is that, there's a willingness to pay. And so then how did you think about in the beginning, whether you want to do some free pilots and really thinking about those the pricing in the beginning and getting some of those initial customers? Like how did you think through some of that?
In my opinion, and what our approach was so we in early days, we're all just selling to schools. We didn't have premium paid features for employers until probably about 2 or 3 years in. And so, and we've always had a free baseline, at least for employers. So on the school side, they're going through an implementation process. They need to get people on board within the school and other things. And what I've just heard and seen with other companies and groups I've talked to is when you give something away for free, there's just a lot less kind of weight behind it and investment in it from their own end. And so we felt that if we gave it away for free, we wouldn't actually see the results we needed. If it was going to be effective, they were going to be willing to pay. And if they did put money up, they were going to be that much more invested in making sure it was successful, versus if we were a free thing, they might launch it alongside other solutions. We wouldn't get much of an attention. And in fact, even in recent history, as we've gone into some new markets internationally, we've given it for free to 1 or 2 schools. And we've seen exactly that problem come up where they're not putting the time and energy into it because there's nothing that they've really put in to make it worth them putting in the effort of having the platform be successful. So I'm a big advocate of really not doing free pilots. We did a few discounts here and there for folks, and we've done hey, let's do a delayed payment in a couple cases, but there needs to be some sort of, whether it's monetary or something else, they need to have investment in this succeeding.
Yeah, I think early on what I had read or learned is that just people always just tend to price too low. I definitely think I probably took that too seriously and we priced too high in the early days. I totally agree. I mean, customers, they're human beings at the end of the day, and they're dealing typically with limited resources. So they will take advantage of you, and doing something for free. When does that end? And you set that precedent now where it's oh, well, you did free work before. Why won't you now? Or why won't you just do this one more thing? And it's just also you're often in the early days, you could be working with someone who is in an innovation group or doesn't have that much sway. And you see the same conversation every time. It's well, we're a huge organization. So if this is successful, this is going to explode into a giant thing. When that partner, that champion has not proven that they're effective on sort of driving some sort of scaled up project or paid for project. And so you could build something really awesome and then you're done with it. And then they don't know how to deploy it effectively or to actually transition that into something that is paid for. I'm sure people do this. They do free pilots, they do trials and are successful, but I really, from my experience, have stayed away from that as well. And think that just you provide so much value and so much expertise, and you're working with it's like getting a custom suit versus one at kind of Men's Warehouse. I mean, nothing against Men's Warehouse, but it's you're working directly, in the early stage, you're working directly with the CTO and the CEO, and every day it's you're not working with Mark Benioff when you buy Salesforce, right? It's a really unique opportunity to shape a product and to get just like this disproportionate amount of attention. So you get a lot of value working with an early stage startup, and they move so fast and it's fun. Obviously, it's like kind of janky typically, but you really need to have a high perception of worth of your product and yourself to kind of start to get the ball rolling and to kind of get used to like, you're going to customers and you're asking them to pay you, and then you have to go to investors and ask them for a lot. And like, you just kind of start, perception of worth is a very important thing to project to your customers, to your investors, to your team. And it's like, yeah, the product's not done yet, but it's like what we're doing here is very valuable. And you want to undercut that. And yeah, everything that Ben said of like having that skin in the game completely changes the dynamic. And it's like, if a customer has something for free, there's no urgency of showing a result or getting something done. It's like, oh, we'll finish it whenever. But if they put 100K into it and they had to like borrow budget from someone else, they have to show a result really quickly. And it's just going to like light a fire under them and be more responsive and kind of like put more effort in to make sure it's successful.
Gotta have some skin in the game. Absolutely. No, those are great points. Thank you both. Switching gears a little bit. I mean, you talked a little bit about the team, and I know founders early on are doing everything from, building the product to selling the product to building out the tech, everything. So when do you think about really building out a product team and maybe hiring, some more individuals on the product side? When is the right time to do that?
I think the decision to hire first PM is incredibly hard. And I think that hiring the first like senior product leader is even harder than that. For us, I mean, even once we did make those hires, we stayed as founders really, really close to all the product decisions, like every single individual decision for years. And even today, every single week, we meet with our R&D leaders and talk about what's happening and what's going on. I think that for us, the moment where we're like, okay, cool, it's time to hire a PM was just when we couldn't keep up on things anymore. We knew we had the engineering resources to build the stuff we needed to build. We knew that the ideas were generally aligned and along the right philosophy, but like really getting into the nitty gritties of like, how should this actually work? Are we talking to enough customers about this? And everything else, I think, was the point. And I would say it's really important to make sure you don't use that as an excuse to then stop talking to customers. And so if your only reason is we can't get enough talking to customers, or I don't want to spend as much time doing that, like that's a bad reason for it. But it was like, we need to get together like really detailed docs. We need to be helping get things into more detail with the engineering team. And we just can't scale to that anymore. That was kind of the factors. That's when we hired our first PM. We interviewed a ton of people. We had a lot of mistakes along the way. Happy to talk about any of those, but at least in terms of like when and how, it was simply just, we didn't have time to do it all anymore, but we knew we needed to stay very involved still in like the strategy and decisions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think for us, like hiring for product or design has always been really hard. We hired our first like real product leader 2020. So it was like, I guess like 4 years in really. I told it like, one of the things is people want to come in that was challenging for us. And they're like, oh, I have so many ideas for this thing. And we certainly want that, but it's like, as founders, we are still like the vision holder or sort of creator. And like you're part of channeling that and figuring out like, okay, like how are we going to make this actionable and make sure that we're prioritizing well for the business? But not necessarily like generating sort of the full product vision, but over time that would kind of shift. And I think having that on the front end was very helpful for us because we really set expectations on what the role was and wasn't going to be in a very product-y kind of fashion. And I think that's worked really well for us. And as something that wasn't like necessarily like, okay, we're just shifting all of this away from the founders and onto the product team and more of like a partnership. An overall vision of how that was going to develop over time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, I'm sorry to everyone who submitted a question and we didn't get to it. I can, gather the questions, send them to Ben and Justin. But thank you both so much for this. This was amazing. I'm not even an early stage founder, and I learned so much from this. I did promise that I would ask you both, just think back to, I guess, when you were early stage founders and maybe pre-product market fit or just kind of finding it, that early traction. Is there any kind of words of wisdom, advice that you would give to yourself early on and to obviously all these early stage founders tuning in?
I think the thing that comes to mind, it's nothing probably all that new, but I think it's really important to just ask lots of questions and ask them frequently, and don't be afraid to ask those stupid questions. And so kind of towards some of the points Justin made and I referenced earlier too, like, don't just talk to one customer, right? Like, talk to a bunch of them, ask really basic questions at first, and use, like, especially when you're really early on, you can kind of use this combination of like the excitement, in fact, you are an earlier company, to like really go into the fundamentals and not need to show up as much as much of an expert on things. And that really helped us just accelerate our learning early on. And then the other thing I would say is just find someone. If you've got a co-founder, then, you know, make sure that you two have kind of or three or however many you are, right? Like, have that place to be able to be really honest with your highs and lows with each other. It was really helpful for me with two other co-founders, where if I was really low, one of them was really high, and vice versa. And we could be honest about that and help kind of pull each other out of those trenches. And if you're a solo founder, find someone that can be that for you, whether it's a mentor, an advisor, a friend, a partner, whatever else. I think that was really critical for us, kind of keeping that motivation and energy through a lot of really trying times, because the early days you're going to get a ton of no's, because you're probably not, if the thing you were doing was so glaringly obvious, right, it probably would have been done before. So don't let the no's discourage you, and find that way to help keep yourself motivated.
Love that.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say the exact same thing. Like, nothing works, and that's how it's like supposed to go. And so just don't be discouraged. It's like I think there have been things that looked at this. It's like grit is like one of the number one markers of success, of just like sticking with it and just never, you know, seeing the failure as like a fun challenge. Because it, you know, I think for our Series A, we spoke to like 81 investors or something like that. And like only one of them said yes, and it took a very long. It was very hard, and it was kind of scary too. So like, just don't give up. I think one of the best resources that I had going through all of this was really like other founders. I think that is just making sure you have a network of other people that are maybe some that are a little bit ahead of you, maybe that are at your level, some a little bit behind, and, you know, just always having someone that you can call to, because you don't have a lot of people that you can go to. Even if you have like a really good partner, someone in the company, some things that maybe you don't want to like open up that you're like worried about or want to say. And it's like other founders really like get it, and you can talk to them about pretty much anything. And I think that's gotten me through a lot of lows. And the last thing I'll say is that the reason why people do startups, whether you're a founder or just part of an early stage team, is because it's fun, right? And it's like, yeah, you do have these low lows. It's a roller coaster, does not begin to describe it. But you have these high highs and these fun things. And it's like, it's not about like being the next Facebook or Google or Amazon. Obviously, that's a part of it, but it's like, it's so cheesy, that the journey, not the destination. Like, now that we're like a little bit bigger, I wouldn't say like we're all the way there, but like all anyone ever talks about are those early days and how much fun we were having. And I think especially founders, you're always looking ahead of like what the next challenge is, next thing is, and a good thing happens. And I see so many people that steel themselves because you built up that grit, because you get so many no's, that it also prevents you from feeling the joy from the wins. And that can also be very demotivating to the team too. They come with you for a big win and you don't seem like you're happy or excited about it. So like, just like having the discipline, it sounds weird to say discipline, but like just stop for a second and be like, hey, this one contract we got, or this one like customer feedback that's positive, like we should all be like getting some pizza or doing something fun right now, or just like laughing and smiling. It's so important to just enjoy those small wins, because otherwise, like, why are you doing this? Like, if it will just tear you apart if you don't just like have fun doing it, even though everything's on fire and going wrong every day.
Wow. Thank you both so much. Again, very profound, and it makes me want to start a company, but you know, I'll stay on the investing side. But no, I mean, thank you both so much. This was amazing. I know our audience learned so much from this, and we'll have the recording. We'll share it around as well for anyone that didn't get to tune in. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you all hopefully in 2 months at the summit. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.